Hello, and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today, I'll be showing you how to cycle from Paddington in west central London to Waterloo, just south of the river. This ride takes about half an hour, and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey takes a little over 20 minutes, so cycling is definitely a competitive way to make this trip. It's also quite a pleasant ride, much of which is through parkland. If you find this video useful, or you just enjoy watching it, then don't forget to hit subscribe, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to everybody who supports the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute as well, you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting across the road from Paddington Station at the Parade Street entrance, and we're going to head down London Street. London Street is actually one way, so if you're doing this route in the opposite direction, you'll need to go up Spring Street, which is nearby. It's not the nicest road to cycle down, but we're only on it for a second, and things will get a lot nicer when we turn the corner onto Sussex Gardens. The cycle lanes on Sussex Gardens are a curious beast. They're not quite protected lanes, but they do have a sort of a buffer between you and the traffic. Whenever I've cycled down here myself, I've always found it relatively comfortable, but I think it would make sense for Westminster Council to add some proper protection on here, whether that's wands or curbs. We then turn right into the Hyde Park estate, and make sure you look over your shoulder as you make that turning. You'll see here that we're passing a few cars, and this area does actually have a bit of an issue with rat running traffic, which is basically motorists using these quiet residential streets as a cut through to avoid the traffic lights on the main roads. There were plans a few years ago to turn this area into a low traffic neighbourhood by adding in some modal filters and making cars go the long way around, but they didn't go ahead. I really hope that decision's revisited, because really it is an issue and it does need sorting. It would also be great to turn this zebra crossing here into a joint cycle and zebra crossing, which would really improve links between Paddington Station and Hyde Park, which is where we're heading now. The reason that we're using Albion Street to get to the park is because it has a pretty decent cycle crossing at the end of it, which allows us to get safely from here into the park itself, which has some really nice traffic-free streets. Just watch for the green light as you cross the road, and then you'll turn onto the carriage drive, which is both traffic free and also has its own protected lanes, so you'll really do absolutely fine along here. In the past, I've actually used other routes in videos to get from Hyde Park up to Paddington Station. Often that involves going via Westbourne Terrace, which has protected lanes on them. Unfortunately, I find that the traffic lights set up there and the constant switching from one side of the road to the other of the cycle lanes really means that going that way takes an extremely long time, and I actually think that going through the quiet streets through Hyde Park Estate is probably a little bit better. I'd be interested to know in the comments what people think about that, especially about the setup on Westbourne Terrace, where I think the lights are really over-engineered and the lane could really do with a rethink. Now, you'll have seen that I just turned out of Hyde Park onto Cumberland Gate. You could stay in Hyde Park and go down the Broad Walk, which is a shared path with pedestrians and cycles on it, or you could do what we're doing, which is we're going down this new protected cycle lane which runs down Park Lane, which is basically parallel to that path on Hyde Park. We're just coming onto it now. I actually prefer Park Lane by quite a distance actually. I think the issue with the path in the park, well, there are two. The first has always been there, which is that pedestrians tend to wander into it. It's quite a popular place for tourists, and not everyone's really looking where they're going. Even though there is a demarcated bit for cycling, people don't really tend to respect it, so you'll tend to find people in your way. The other is that the Royal Parks, which is not the most cycling friendly organisation in the country, has put in loads of little mini speed bumps which make it actually actively unpleasant to ride down sometimes. So if you're not in a hurry and you've got a high pain threshold for those speed bumps, then feel free to cycle through the park, but I'm going to be whizzing down this nice new protected lane along the side of Park Lane. It's perfectly nice and you're separated from traffic for the whole thing, although there was a little bit that we just went through which is a shared pavement, so when you cycle on that bit, just make sure that you're keeping an eye out for pedestrians, because not all of them are going to know that it's a shared path and they'll sort of be dawdling in the road there. Some of them might be surprised by your presence. The reason it does go onto a shared pavement for a second is to bypass a sort of underground entry to a car park. It looks a little bit like this coming up on our right here, which is actually a pedestrian underpass, but it's the same sort of deal. Funnily enough, once upon a time the spot where we're cycling actually used to be part of the park, and that's because Park Lane was actually widened a number of times throughout the years until it became this sort of urban motorway it is now, and to do that they took land from Hyde Park. So it's kind of nice to see some of it being reclaimed. This Toucan crossing coming up here, just be aware that there's never any traffic on this road, so you don't have to wait for green. A few weeks ago I did actually see a family of tourists just standing there and waiting at the empty road for the green to cross, which is kind of noble of them but also very unnecessary. The opposite is true here though. I would always wait for the pedestrian crossing when crossing this large urban motorway here, as cars can come around it at an extreme pace and really just come out of nowhere. Also, I'd recommend cycling under the arch there instead of doing what I did going around, just because it feels kind of cool. We've got another pedestrian crossing here, and we've actually been pretty lucky to get across both at once, because usually you have to wait for at least one. Make sure you pick the right hand path here, by the way, because you see that black fence on the left. The left hand side of it is for pedestrians and the right hand side here is for cycles. Unfortunately, if you make the wrong choice at the top, there isn't actually a comfortable way of getting from one side to the other. As you can see, the barrier is more or less continuous, so getting a bike over or under that is going to be a bit of a trial. One cool thing to note is that on the weekend, Constitution Hill itself is completely closed to motor traffic, so you could just cycle on the road then, and it's quite fun. The same is true for the mall. If you look on the left here, you'll see the police have stopped someone on a bike there. I don't know why that is, but I think police were generally stopping people and talking to them. I'm not sure whether it was people who were skipping lights or maybe people using modified e-bikes. I'm really not sure. You can see on the right by the traffic light there's another police officer there just watching for something. One thing to note here is that on the weekend when this area is a pedestrian area, people who are walking around don't tend to respect the cycle lanes. They tend to walk in them. My advice would actually just be to go with the flow, so don't get too militant about enforcing the cycle lane on pedestrians, because you can cycle anywhere on the street when it's pedestrianised at weekends. So, just take it slow and work your way through the crowd, and if you find people in your way, don't worry too much. I know some people will have different views on that, but this is the approach that I've taken that I've found has, paid off the best and allowed me to get through that area without getting too frustrated. We're now on Birdcage Walk, which is a really pleasant cycle route with a sort of lightly protected cycle lane. We're running along the edge of St James's Park, and my favourite fact about St James's Park is that there are pelicans in it and that they were the gift of the Russian ambassador way back in the 17th century. I'm always amazed at how tame the wildlife in that park actually is. The squirrels sort of come up to you as if you're like Snow White or something like that. Now, this junction here with horse guards, I actually really think should not be signal controlled. There's almost no traffic coming out of horse guards, and yet you have to wait for about a minute to go past the signals. It could be filtered with an exemption for vehicles accessing Downing Street, and no signals will be needed. Now, there's a really serious problem here. We're trying to get to a cycle lane on the other side of these cars, and you can see that they're actually blocking the route. I actually had to wait for 2 light phases to even get through there. Obviously, I edited out the wait so you couldn't see that. It would make a lot of sense to add a keep clear marking, or even better, a camera enforced yellow box junction to stop motorists from stopping on it. I don't remember it always being an issue there, so I'm not sure what's changed, but it's happened a few times that I've gone through there recently. Another thing that seems to have got worse is actually the light phase that we just went through. Although obviously you didn't see the wait there, going in this direction you have to wait for a really, really long time before you get a green on a bike. I do wonder if anybody else has noticed that and whether or not it's changed for the worse or not. This cycle lane as well, I just would warn everyone to be extremely careful in. This bridge is always really busy with tourists and they have a habit of jumping out into the cycle lane, and you need to be prepared to stop. There's also a persistent problem with ice cream vans parking on the double red lines there, which sounds funny until you realise that what they're doing is incredibly dangerous. They're essentially luring tourists to jump across the cycle lane, including children in fact, because children notoriously like ice cream. It's so dangerous that the police have actually started cracking down on it, and I spoke to a police officer down there the other day who was doing some enforcement, and he said that they ticket these vans every single day, but they come back and they just take it as a cost of doing business because they make so much money selling to tourists on the bridge. I really hope that gets sorted out, because currently those vans are making a really quite poorly designed cycle lane even more dangerous, and it's probably only a matter of time before someone gets seriously injured if they haven't already done so. Now we're going to turn off right here onto Concert Hall Approach, and I just warn you to be careful about the surface here, as you can see it's quite poor. It's supposed to be tiled, but it's sort of been tarmacked over in various bits as the tiling has fallen apart. Also, when we're on Sutton Walk here, just make sure you're going relatively slowly, as it is shared with pedestrians and does get really busy with crowds coming out of the station. We can wait for the light here, and as you cross the road into Waterloo Station, you'll see that we're basically there, but I'm going to show you how to get into the probably best entrance. It's kind of a flat entrance, so you don't have to log your bike up any steps. If you've made it this far in the video, you should really hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, as I have a lot more videos like this and you're clearly enjoying it, so why don't you come back for more. And just a big thank you again to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon, and if you want to support me as well, then you can find a link in the description below the video. But that's it, we are now there, and as you can see that's a pretty direct route. I think most of that is actually really quite a pleasant ride, and it really does show that you don't have to take the tube to get between these two big mainline stations. A lot of people ask me for routes between stations, so if you've got any more ideas for videos you'd like to see, just let me know in the comments below and I'll see what I can do. I'd also love to hear your thoughts about the ice cream van. So yeah, get down there, give us a like as well, and I'll see you again next time.